Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, speculation over a possible Senate run for Mitt Romney reaches a fever pitch. Does he have the support needed to win? Will this influence Senator Hatch's decision to retire? And does Romney even want the job? Utah Republicans spar over the future of the caucus convention system, which is anything but certain. How will they navigate internal disputes and unify the party? New polling shows a wide gap between candidates in the 3rd District. With less than 2 months to go, how will they make their case to Utah voters? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I am Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Robert Gerke, columnist with the Salt Lake Tribune, Lisa Riley Roche, political reporter with the Deseret News, and Boyd Matheson, president of the Sutherland Institute. So glad to have you all with us today. A lot of things happening in politics, but I want to start with maybe the story we all read about the most. And Lisa, for you, maybe the story you've written about the most.
It feels like it.
Mitt Romney back in the news as a potential candidate to replace Senator Orrin Hatch. Give us the lay of the land on that one.
Well, this is sort of Mitt's last chance to hold an elective office where he can have some real influence. A lot of people say, why would you want to go from being a governor, being a presidential nominee, to being one of 100 U.S. senators? But for Mitt, it would be an opportunity to have that national stage again and to continue to speak out on issues as he has against then candidate Trump and even President Trump. This would be an opportunity for him to really be in the spotlight with that opinion at a time when he thinks it's really important to share that opinion. And I'm actually hearing that he's looking very seriously at this.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Robert? Can he have that stage? How will it play for him?
It is interesting because after the last election, he kind of went into seclusion a little bit, and then he came back out and to criticize Trump, and he's come out a couple times since then. You know, the people I've talked to that are close to him think that he is serious about considering this, but everybody's kind of waiting for Orrin Hatch to make up his mind. Orrin obviously is getting up there, he's getting older, but I think he's going to take as much time as he can because he really wants to get tax reform done, and you can't really do that. He loses a lot of leverage if he makes himself a lame duck. So I think he's going to drag this out as long as he can. That works to Mitt Romney's advantage, though, because Mitt Romney doesn't need to sort of lay the groundwork and introduce himself to voters. They've already voted for him once when he ran for president. So they've got some time to kind of let this play out. But, you know, the other question I have kind of is, you know, he'd come in as a freshman. There's talk that Senator McConnell, majority leader, would give him some extra status, right? But I'm not sure why Senator McConnell would necessarily want to do that and risk alienating the other members of the body who are maybe more senior, you know, maybe getting skipped over for committee chairmanships and that sort of thing.
I've heard that rumor too. Boyd, what are your thoughts about that? So let's just say McConnell has had those conversations with him. How much of a leg up would that even give Mitt Romney if he
Well, if you know senators, there's no, so the way the seniority system works is you come into a committee and there's probably 8 senators ahead of you, and there is no way Mitch McConnell is going to get 8 United States senators to say, please, Mitt, take over the chairmanship. Right. It is not going to happen. And so he would have a stage and a platform unique from anyone, and Mitch McConnell would probably give him some status within leadership. He does that from time to time to pull people in. But I think that the bigger question that we're not hitting on all of this is, you know, we're looking at will Orrin run, won't he run, will Mitt run, well, if he does, who doesn't, and we're playing all of this gyration game, and we're asking the wrong questions, because elections are always about what's next. And unfortunately, no one's doing that right now. I think the American people and the people of Utah are tired of politicians whose vision is a vision of themselves in office, not a vision for the state. And so really what we should be asking is, what is the vision? I mean, Mitt obviously has great experience, would bring a lot to the table, but what's the vision of next? It's the one thing I really credit Governor Leavitt for doing very well. In his re-elections, it was never a look back of, hey, we did this or I've done that. It was always about a challenge of what's next. And Senator Hatch hasn't laid out a what's next vision. Mitt hasn't, because he's obviously not in or out. But really you have to ask the question, to me, and this is what I would always ask as chief of staff, I was kind of the gatekeeper for a lot of people who were thinking about running for office. And my question was always, what's the agenda? What's the vision that would make all of this grief and sacrifice worth it, even if you ran and lost?
That's interesting. So put it in perspective. If Mitt Romney did run and if he did win, and if we talk about this, what's next, there's one thing that's different from him from other candidates is there is not a long period of time for him to be in this role, right? So that is a possibility.
Presumably would be one term, right? I mean, he could run for re-election possibly, but he would be an old freshman senator, right? I mean, he's been around the block for a while. And the other thing I think that sort of would complicate things is there's a lot of talk that Josh Romney wants to run for governor. Does that, if we have Senator Mitt Romney, does Governor Josh Romney become less likely? Do we have problems with the dynasty effect there?
I'm curious about that too. Lisa, do you have a thought if, let's say, Mitt Romney decides to run and he wins? Have a thought on what that might do to Josh's intention to run for governor?
What I'm hearing is no, that wouldn't have an impact. And think about Utahns and the Romney name. Utahns love Mitt Romney. They have no reason not to love Josh Romney once they see him and get to know him, especially if he campaigns with his father for governor here. And going back to what Boyd said, and by the way, Boyd, you sounded a little bit like a candidate there. I know we've heard your name.
Boyd, your name is out there.
Talking about a vision. In my mind, Romney, the vision for Romney would be, he would be someone with the stature to stand up to Trump for the Republicans in the Senate and in Congress generally. We're seeing such a mess right now with the president working with Democrats in the Senate to get certain pieces of legislation done, undercutting his own party in the Senate. Here's a Mitt Romney who could stand up and articulate a defense against Trump as a Republican.
Which is interesting too, because I think that's also part of the calculation that Mitt is going through is, that President Trump and a Steve Bannon wouldn't be too excited about having Mitt Romney at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue casting judgment on whatever they're doing or not doing. And you look at what they've done. I mean, they're spending $10 million on some pretty under-the-radar senators in Jeff Flake and Dean Heller in Nevada. What would they unleash? I don't think it would impact the race here in Utah, but it'd be pretty miserable, I think, for Mitt to have a $10 million campaign run against him in the state of Utah. So I think that's part of the calculation. Okay, so there's just one more thing on this particular race, because in this poll, Jenny Wilson is the one for the Democrats that was put up against these candidates, and she did pretty well in a few of them, but particularly she did well in the head-to-head against Orrin Hatch. Lisa, a thought about that?
Well, let's remember that the poll did not identify the candidates by party. And of course, everyone knows Mitt Romney's a Republican. Everyone knows Orrin Hatch is a Republican. They don't know as much about Chris Stewart. He still has fairly low name ID for a sitting congressman. But Jenny Wilson, not clear whether people answering that question realized they said they'd rather have a Democrat than the sitting Republican senator.
Yes, revealing all by itself without the party identification, which is interesting. We'll watch that closely.
And I just want to jump in. I think if you look back 6 years, Orrin had some really lousy poll numbers at the time then, too. There was 3/4 of the people wanted somebody else to run. He ended up winning with about 70% of the vote. So he's no stranger to bad poll numbers preceding an election, and he's always managed to pull it out, once it comes to time to campaign.
That's true. A very tough campaigner. We're talking about Mitt Romney. Let's talk for just a second about one of Utah's other favorite sons, John Huntsman Jr. This week, he will be facing the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for his confirmation. Robert, how's it going to go?
I think it could be a little bit rough for him, because I think a lot of the senators, particularly on the Foreign Relations Committee, are concerned about the United States relationship with Russia and its involvement in the last election. I think they're going to want some answers from him that maybe he doesn't have for them. But Boyd can vouch for this. They end up using these nominees sometimes as leverage to get other things out of the White House. So far, I think the administration has mostly cooperated with the investigations into Russia. But if it's seen that they aren't cooperating, or there's something that these investigators want, they could hold up that nomination to try to get that out.
That's right, and I think they will try to leverage a few things. There'll be a few bruising things, but they won't really be targeted at John Huntsman Jr. He's just collateral on this thing. And so and I think there are I think every senator is hoping we can get some stability in the Russia region and the Russia issues, and nobody represents that better than Jon Huntsman Jr. And so I think while he may have some collateral dings here and there, I think it will be a pretty smooth process, because I think everybody believes it's good for the country for Jon Huntsman Jr. to play that role. I think he's actually a far better diplomat than even he is a politician, and it's a good role for him, and that's good for the country.
Lisa, you've written some great stories about it. I know you've talked to Jon Huntsman Jr. about this as well. If these proceedings go as we just talked about, will many of these things be about him? In the end, does everyone get their statement about Russia, and he's just confirmed, I guess, for the fourth time in his history by the Senate?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of question about whether he'll end up being confirmed or not. But to everyone's point, the question is this hearing about him at all? I mean, he's been in the news for this nomination for how many months now? How long did it take for him to get formally nominated after the leaked news that he was going to be named U.S. Ambassador to Russia was anonymously confirmed by the administration? Took several months for there to be a nomination. Now it's taken more months for there to be a hearing set. It's, I think everyone's probably a little bit frustrated by this, that with all that's going on with the U.S. and Russia, we don't have.
We probably need him right now, right?
There on the ground.
Throughout the State Department, the State Department has scores of positions that people haven't been confirmed for these spots yet. There's a lot of empty office space at the State Department right now. I will say, I think one of the things we'll watch for too, and I should probably put the disclosure that Jon Huntsman Jr. is the brother of the Tribune's owner, so I should
Nice job,
the conflict there. But I think we will see some questions about the family's. The family's business holdings in Russia, and so I think they've kind of worked through those over the last few months, but it will be something that's put out there, because they do have some business interests in petroleum in Russia.
And I think some of this delay was by design. I think they wanted to keep Huntsman out of the prop wash of all the scandalous things, and I think they're hoping that he can represent a pivot point in terms of the Russia relationship and all of the other drama that's going on around Russia. Whether that actually happens or not, I'm highly doubtful.
Okay, let's spend just a moment on the other race we're watching for 2018 with our 3rd congressional district. Recent polls have John Curtis ahead of Kathy Allen by 30 points. Which is a pretty good amount for this one, but let's break that down for a second. Lisa, I know you've gone through the polling. Tell us what that really means.
Well, what's interesting is you have a Republican candidate who just came through a very high-profile primary at a little over 50% in a poll in one of the most Republican districts in the country. He's running against a Democrat who is running very much to the left. She's running for single-payer health care, for example. You've got some third-party candidates trying to get some attention, specifically Jim Bennett of the United Utah Party went to court to get on the ballot. That raised his profile, but not enough to meet the poll threshold to make the debate. Missed it by less than 0.5%.
Yeah, so interesting. What do you make of that, Robert? Is that something we're just kind of missing out on, that chance that he's not going to be in the debates, or at least some of them?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this in the past where candidates fall just short of the debates, and it's kind of unfortunate because, and if you're running as a third-party candidate, really the debate is sort of your Hail Mary pass. You want to be on the stage with those other candidates because it gives you some credibility, and it lets you have an exchange. It puts you on their level. And missing that, I think, was a big blow for Bennett and for the United Utah Party. It does remain to be seen. I mean, whether or not he's able to kind of do anything else to sort of get on the radar in this race. Right now, it doesn't look like he really is making that much of an impact.
One last comment about this, if I might. In the primary for the Republicans, PAC money became a huge issue from outside sources. With this race being what it is now, are those groups coming back in? Boyd, are you hearing?
No, they're not. They're not coming back in, and I think they completely miscalculated what they were trying to do. Most of the PAC money was spent on, behalf of Chris Herod, and it shows that going in with just the negative doesn't really work in Utah. There is some ding, and I think Mayor Curtis has experienced a little bit of that hit. But in a race where you had Chris Herod and Tanner Ainge, who had almost no name ID to begin with, to focus $1 million on the one person who had name ID only helped John Curtis. If those PACs would have instead run positive ads promoting Ainge and Curtis, they could have made a little bit of a difference. But again, it shows that the outside PAC money rarely makes the impact they think they're going to have in a state.
I do love seeing Club for Growth waste $1 million in a state, though. I mean, those guys, they come in every year and try to influence the elections from D.C., and it just never seems to work out for them.
I'll tell you who will influence these elections going forward, one way or the other, is the Central Committee and the Republican Party. All right, we're back talking about Senate Bill 54, the Count My Vote initiative. The last 2 days, this has got pretty hot. All right, Robert, let's talk about what's happening there. And then Lisa, you sat through all 6 hours, is that right?
Yes,
Hazard
yes, I
pay for
did,
Lisa
including the making of tinfoil hats.
Oh, I heard, yes. The
yes.
tinfoil hats did arrive.
Yes, yes, and did not have the desired effect.
Okay, well, you start, and then we'll talk to Robert about what happens next. Talk about what they tried to do and what ended up really happening.
Well, one of the Central Committee members had a resolution to stop the legal fight against SB 54. Remember, the party did that once. The Central Committee, which is the governing body of the Republican Party, voted once to end the legal fight, and then met again and decided, no, we're going to keep going with this. They have oral arguments before the 10th Circuit Court in Denver later this month. Obviously, that's not going to resolve this, but they want to keep fighting. The party chairman, Rob Anderson, basically ran for the chairmanship on a ticket of, I'm not going to keep doing this. This is hurting the party. It's hurting fundraising. It's hurting the relationship with Republicans. I mean, it's a Republican-dominated state. You have the Republican Party fighting Republican leaders over this. Well, so basically the meeting was an attempt to delay any kind of discussion or action on the resolution to end the legal fight. And when they got to a point where that was the only thing left to do, they adjourned. So there's not really been a big discussion since the new chairman came in about whether this is the right way to go.
So what I would anticipate is going to happen is the chairman's just going to drop the lawsuit. I mean, he sent out an email to members yesterday saying, I have the prerogative to drop the lawsuit if I see fit, and then it's going to force the hand of the state central committee to try to basically impeach him. It's going to take 60% to, evict him from office, essentially. But it's kind of mind-boggling that they're still fighting over this. There's still this small group of delegates who are, kind of out of touch with the rest of the state and don't seem to be paying attention to what's going on in elections around the state. And they're going to fight tooth and nail to cling to this power that they've got. And it's the writing's on the wall. I think they're going to lose this lawsuit. I think the court's rulings in the past have been pretty on point. They're going to lose this lawsuit. It's going to cost them. They're already $300,000 in debt, and at some point they've got to recognize that the fight's over. They're the only ones that are just refusing to accept that.
Well, what happens? Let's take it. They go through with this court case, but if they proceed or if they win, then the Count My Vote organizers are back in action, right?
Right.
And what happens ultimately?
Regardless of whether they win or lose the lawsuit, Count My Vote's going to be back. They're going to restart their initiative drive next week, is what we're hearing, with an eye toward getting rid of the convention process altogether this time. Last time, if you remember, they were pushing for direct primaries where you gather a certain number of signatures and get on the primary ballot. But they compromised with the legislature and said, okay, we'll drop the initiative, but we're going to do signature gathering and we're going to have the conventions. This time they're not compromising. They're going to get rid of the conventions altogether. They're going to just do the primary route. They're going to drop the threshold to get on the ballot, which I think is probably a good thing. There was some problems last time where where the levels in some districts were really high. And now they're going to drop it to 1.5% of the registered voters in that particular district. And they're going to have a runoff too. That's going to be a vote by mail runoff if somebody doesn't get 35% in the primary, which addresses a concern of plurality that a lot of people were expressing. So, and this is going to be the year of the initiative. I think in 2018 we've got like 4 of them now
right.
that are already queued up for this. Yeah. And so if you own a signature gathering company, I think you're probably doing really well right now.
Yeah, that's true. What do you think about this? What if the Republicans, even if they win that lawsuit, if you win the battle but lose the war, as Robert just talking about, what's the strategy there?
So I think that this really leads to an interesting issue for all political parties, but Democrats and Republicans in particular, is that it used to be there was some cachet in being a card-carrying Republican or a card-carrying Democrat, and neither party have given voters a reason to be part of their organization, especially millennials. And the more this continues and more this infighting goes on, the less appealing that becomes to everyone. Utahns are very independent-minded. They like to consider themselves to be very independent, and we're seeing the trend going towards unaffiliated voters, people who are declaring themselves independent or unaffiliated. And I think both political parties really need to stop and say, what are we really about? What is it that we are for that we can take to the people of Utah? If I were a Democratic strategist, I would circle Utah. Not that they're going to turn the state blue, but again, there's a lot of independent-minded or people who like to think they're independent-minded Utahns who would jump on board with that. But it has to be about a message of what they're for, not just that we're against this party, we're against count my vote, or we're against this, or we're against that. You have to have this vision of what are we for as a party. Otherwise, I think you're going to see not just one or two new third-party emerge. You're going to have a host of small parties, because no longer do you have to have massive amounts of money and a big superstructure to run a political party. You can run it out of your garage, off of Facebook and Twitter, and make it all work. And so I think we're coming to a very interesting inflection point to politics in the state of Utah. And I think you're going to see people really have to come with a vision and a set of principles and policies that ring true to the Utah people.
The last point on this one right here, it's interesting that the governor yesterday met with press, and he talked about SB 54 directly. He said, I wish I had vetoed it then because of the divisiveness that is caused in the party. But the next part was interesting when he said that we would also veto it if it came again. In fact, we have his statement said, the disappointment to me is the divisiveness is caused as a Republican in the Republican Party. In fact, in hindsight, I wish I had vetoed SB 54 just because of this backbiting and divisiveness.
Well, had he vetoed it, though, at that time, we probably would have seen Count My Vote come back sooner rather than later. And we'd have a direct primary now.
I think that's his point. I think his point is I wish I would have vetoed it and let the voters just decide it back then instead of having this 4-year-long process.
And the voters would have decided in favor of it according to all the polling.
Yeah. Let's talk about opinions of voters for a minute, because I'm curious about what's happened with President Trump this last week, because voters are having some things to say, particularly his base. He started making deals with Democrats. All right, we had the debt ceiling and maybe something on DACA. Boyd, let's start with you for a second on this. Why is he brokering these deals? That's not his party, right?
Explain Trump in 30 seconds or less.
Yes,
that is a tall order for this program. No, I think the one thing that everyone has to recognize is President Trump is not relationship driven. He is 100% transactional. So transactions versus relations. And the Republicans, particularly in the Senate with Leader McConnell, they're still functioning in some 1970s thing where because the president is of our party, we have a relationship with the president and everything's going to be fine. So President Trump can go to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and make a deal today on DACA or the debt ceiling. He'll blow them up on Twitter tomorrow. Because everything's a transaction. And so he is going to make deals. And in one of the oddest ironies for as exhausting and exasperating as his presidency has already been the first 6 months, he may actually be the president that undoes the logjam in Washington, D.C., because everyone's going to have to start looking at things independently, transaction to transaction. What does it mean? What's the coalition? It's going to be very much an allies and alliances presidency. And he's going to get to people that will make deals, that will get things done. And so it's going to cause leadership in both parties to really reassess and not just say, well, because he's the same party as we are, everything's going to be just fine.
I think you're right. I think Trump looked at it and said, well, we tried it their way. We tried to repeal health care and with just the Republicans, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And he's sort of, I think he's triangulating. If you remember what the Clinton administration did, he would play them off against each other, you know? And so I think that's what he's done here with Pelosi and Schumer. I think it sends a pretty clear message to McConnell that I'm not indebted to you. I don't owe you my loyalty. And you know, he is the deal maker, right? And I think you mentioned, though, that what does this do for his base? I think, you know, people are upset with him. I mean, talk radio was going crazy with with him making deals with Schumer and Pelosi. I don't know that it's going to hurt him, though, that much in the long run.
I wonder about that, though. I wonder if this is the weakening of his base and the weakening of his relationship with pretty much everybody now in Congress, because you're right, it's only a matter of time before he turns on the Democrats, right? If he's going to continue to be able to make these kinds of deals in the future, why would anyone take him so seriously if He's not really pushing deals because he believes in something, because he wants a very specific piece of legislation passed. Remember, we saw that with the repeal and replace. He just wanted something. He wanted Obamacare repealed and replace it with anything, just to be able to say he did it. To your point about him being transactional, he doesn't really care about the result. He just cares about getting something done, right?
Is it the win or is it the result? What is it?
I do think his base is giving him a very, very long leash because they know he's going up against the swamp. And so I don't think the results are the critical thing for him right now, because he knows, again, usually when we look at politicians, we're saying, okay, they've got a 35% approval rating, they have no power, they have no political capital to spend. Donald Trump doesn't think that way. And even if his poll numbers were 10%, he would still do the same transaction on the same idea or the same agenda that he has, regardless, because he doesn't look at poll numbers as political capital. If you're down in the polls, you got to be safe and you got to work this deal, or if you have some, you can be more bold. He has his agenda, and he's gonna rock on that, regardless of what poll numbers tell him or what Mitch McConnell has to say at the Wednesday lunch.
But that agenda is not very specific when you look at it, right? I mean, immigration, build a wall. Well, the wall isn't even apparently part of this deal with the Senate Democrats. Hence the frustration with among his base.
Well,
at some point, he's not going to be able to point to doing much of anything.
I think more than the wall, I think what we've seen, his path on DACA illustrates his total lack of sort of any clear vision. Because if you remember when he was campaigning, he was going to repeal DACA and deport all these children of all these dreamers. And then when he got into office, he was like, well, we're going to look at it for a while. And now the announcement last week was we're going to repeal it, and then it was like, well, we're going to repeal it in 6 months, and now it's like we're going to. I've made this deal with the Democrats to keep it in place, and so he's done a full 180 on this.
Yeah. Yes, this is one we're going to keep watching, because it's going to be very hot, and our legislation, our Congress has to look at this, right? 6 months.
That's right.
They've got a limited amount of time.
Very good. Sadly, that's where we're going to have to end it today. That's it for the Hinckley Report. Our conversation continues online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. Thank you for joining us. Good night.